Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. I want you to rev up your engines today because we are going to have a fantastic conversation with Freddy Daza, who is the Director of Innovation at Volvo Group's Innovation Lab in Silicon Valley, where he leads an interdisciplinary team of innovators and entrepreneurs. And this is a really talented team that co-creates and launches new services and solutions by collaborating with startups and strategic partners for Volvo Group. And I want to make sure we're clear that Volvo Group is a little bit different from Volvo Cars, right? Those are the passenger cars you see all day. But Freddy's group, and he's going to tell us more about it, is more on the truck side, on the industrial side, really managing the needs of industry for Volvo. So we're going to get into all of that. But Freddy's background is in engineering and has over 20 years of experience introducing disruptive technologies to traditional industries ranging from construction and mining, mobility, and transportation. Not only does he have a master's degree from MIT, but he spends a lot of time playing soccer with his lovely kids, and occasionally as a good Colombian enjoying a good cup of coffee with the people he cares about. Am I right, Freddy?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Okay, so tell us, how did you even get into innovation? I mean, MIT is a pretty good start, right? But that's not really where you started the innovation journey.
No, actually, I started my journey many years ago when I was working back in Colombia. So I used to work in the mining industry for one of the mining equipment dealers in Colombia. So Colombia has a lot of coal mines, and the operation of these mines required this huge equipment that moves all the dirt and recapture all the coal that is to be exported. So I had the chance to work in mining, and actually I lived in a mine site, in a coal mine, for quite a few years. But my work there was focused on trying to implement the first GPS systems for drills. So I remember, like today, you have a GPS in your phone, but back in the end of 1990s, a GPS antenna was a huge disc like this that you have to install on this massive piece of equipment. And it was just that people was able to identify where they need to do the mining with high accuracy. So I actually was in charge of doing the implementation of this technology. And back, like, everyone is like, oh, this is another gimmick. Nobody will use this GPS thing. And look at now, right? I mean, GPS is pervasive in anything that we have, from like moving to the grocery stores to like having your planes and knowing where the planes are going at any given time. So I think that's the journey that I had. And I was in charge of this implementation of this technology. And after that, I had a few other things with the dealership in Colombia, working mainly on driving the digital transformation, changing some of the processes and systems that we have in place. And then I joined Caterpillar I was in 2005 as the mining technology and autonomy manager for Latin America. So there is a huge amount of mines in Latin America. And I was in charge of trying to educate them on implementing this kind of new technologies that goes from high precision GPS all the way to autonomous trucks. And we're talking autonomous trucks in like early 2000s. So we had those applications. And after I just took
Can we stop for just a heartbeat? Can we, like, autonomous transportation, right? We're talking about self-driving vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Or at least even remote. How pervasive are these now? Just my own curiosity, because we think Tesla, Elon Musk, autonomous, but the reality is industry has been ahead of the consumer gig for a really long time.
Absolutely.
How pervasive are these autonomous vehicles right now?
Well, I know that in some of the mining operations, they are using autonomous vehicles for specific applications. Like, for instance, Volvo has an autonomous operations in Norway, in a mine site called Brønnøy. And we have a fleet of trucks that are moving some material from the mine into the port. So it's all of this operation is using autonomous vehicles that are usually moving 24/7. So they don't have the challenges of having and the risk associated with safety that we see in other industries, right? So I think it's actually quite intense. And I think in mining, was a very early adopter, because when mines are not located in nice locations, right? They are usually located in
Next to
very
the 7-Eleven.
remote areas. And so you need to build a camp, you need to build like a restaurants to keep the people and to feed them. And that is a huge investment. So if there is a way to actually minimize that cost, autonomous vehicles become a very feasible option for them, because they save a lot of money on the ongoing and operations cost, right?
So that makes total sense. So I interrupted you. So let's keep going. So you're moving into this space, right? And then
Yeah.
you find yourself how in the context of innovation?
Yeah, so basically the main topic that we had is like, how do we support customers in traditional industries to understand and embrace these new technologies? And I think we have two components. We have the research and development and the technology itself. That's one component, right? And people know how to do it and they just try to figure out how to implement that. But I think the value is like, how do we take those technologies and apply it to my business? That was the thing that I was trying to support customers on. Is not just about the technology, it's about the processes that you need to put in place in order to introduce those technologies. It's about the value that you can get out of this and how to reinvest that so you can continue growing with those. So in my mind, the technology side and the R&D part is one component, but I think the beauty of innovation is like, how do I consider this technology in the context of the operations of the different industries that we're trying to support, a point that we had there. And so I actually was doing that for quite a few years. And after that, I decided to take a break. And actually, I learned that we need to have a little bit more focus on the academic side. So I decided to take a break and went to MIT to take an MBA for a year and a half. So I took that pause, learned a bit more about the innovation and entrepreneurship. And after that, I joined a startup. So actually, instead of going back to the large corporations, I decided to go to a startup in Chicago. And I worked there for about 3 years on predictive analytics and predictive maintenance. How can we support companies to anticipate failures, especially in this massive equipment, so we can reduce the cost and basically have everything prepared to increase the productivity and the utilization of these assets. So that was about 3 years. And then like I got to a point where I had this startup experience, I have this corporate experience, I used to deal with cutting edge technologies. How can I just combine this and basically have a new or revamp my job and take advantage of all these experiences? And then Volvo had this concept of launching the Innovation Lab. And that's why basically it combines all the elements, right? I have the ability to translate the technologies and the processes that we see into the corporate setting with a startup mindset and with a structure that the academia can provide. And I think that's why I joined the Volvo Group about 4 years ago.
So give us an overview. What is the Volvo Innovation Lab and what are you focused on doing?
Well, Volvo Innovation Lab we started the Innovation Lab 4 years ago. And the idea with the Innovation Lab was to uncover the next horizon of revenue streams for Volvo via digital services. So Volvo has been producing and manufacturing and supporting very reliable vehicles and construction equipment, buses, and marine engines. And we have a good track record in terms of safety, environmentally sustainable. We have been actually producing very reliable and productive equipment. But then there was a missing point. It's like, how do we build the digital services that complement the ecosystem of products that we have in place? So we launched the Innovation Lab with that mindset. How do we identify the next horizon of growth for Volvo Group via digital services that enrich the experience to the customer? And to that extent, we had one Innovation Lab in Sweden, and that was started in Sweden 4 years ago. But I think the mantra that we wanted to develop is that it's better for us to co-create with partners and rather than just trying to develop this on our own. So that way will give us a complete different perspective. It will give us a little bit more speed when we go to market. and also reduce the risk for us because we don't have to actually commit many resources to a specific task. We can work with startups that work day and night on their solution. We have a blueprint of all the services that we want to develop, and then we start working with multiple partners to develop that blueprint of services that we want to deliver to our customers from the digital perspective. So that's how we started this journey with the Innovation Lab. So we opened the innovation office in Mountain View, California in 2019, just before COVID. And we hired a group of entrepreneurs to initiate the journey that we had, mainly with the conviction of co-creating with the startups. So to that extent, instead of having a physical office, that another Volvo office that we use in Silicon Valley, we wanted to create a collaboration community. So we have the space, we manage the space, is fully branded with Volvo, but I think we try to focus on at least 50% of the space should be rented to startups that share the same values and the same mission that we have to transform the transportation and mobility industry. So we actually rent 50% of our space to startups. And when we see potential of these startups to actually collaborate with us, we facilitate that collaboration via workshops or bringing executives from Volvo into the Innovation Lab to work with these startups to launch these services.
Yeah. So tell us about what is an example of some of these digital services, and tell us about the stories that you told to get those digital services into the hands of the people who need them.
Well, when I joined Volvo, I joined as an innovation manager. So my task was basically work with the brands to identify a gap, identify a pain point in the customer that we cannot solve today. And basically, we wanted to have a partner to help us co-create that solution. So I've got a few examples, like for instance, we were actually talking to some customers about how do we streamline the process for customers to, like when the driver is, you have a fleet of trucks, and you can have 100 or 1,000 trucks, but then those trucks need to have a key to actually turn it on, right? I mean, and surprisingly, not all the trucks can be opened with their phone, right? But the other thing is, like, it's not the same relationship that you have with your own vehicle, because every day you may drive a different truck. So how do you manage the access to the vehicles via a platform that basically connects the capability of the drivers with the availability of the assets? And so we actually worked on that and talked to drivers. I mean, actually, we went in many rides with drivers to see how they use, what are the challenges. There is many cases where they leave the keys inside of the cab, but they need to deliver the load there. I mean, how do I work in those situations? And they are in remote locations. So you have to be empathetic and understanding the pain points from the customer and the user in this case. Then I was actually promoted to manage the entire team in Silicon Valley, and I'm becoming more like an enabler for the innovation managers. So I think in the initial stages, I was more focused on the tactical side, like understanding customer desirability, technology feasibility, financial viability, and monetization models. We were trying to understand the customer needs and the pain points that they are having. We defined tests and pilots to actually validate if the hypothesis that we have was actually real and if we had value there, and actually going and being with the customer. Nowadays, I'm moving more into a more strategic role, which is more about uncovering ways to innovate within the boundaries of the culture that we have in Volvo. Again, it's not the same if you try to do innovation in Shell or in Caterpillar than if you do it in Volvo. So we just need to understand what are the drivers that make the change in the culture here, and then try to put together this in the context that aligns to the values that we're trying to have in the corporation. So that's my main challenge these days, because I think culture, it's a strategy for breakfast, right? I mean, you can have all these strategies around how to do innovation, and you have a very comprehensive process, but if you are not connecting that to the culture that you're trying to present, and you tell the right story, the right message that resonates with the executives that makes the decision, then you may not have any success on this.
So what's an example that you have of doing that, Freddie? Where have you had to do that to get other people on board? Maybe influence an engineering team or another partner that like doesn't necessarily see the light, and it's your job to paint a picture of that future that other people can't see yet.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we have is that today, when you talk to the brands, they have a very clear understanding of the evolution of the traditional products that we have. So for instance, we manufacture trucks, and you say, okay, how does the truck look in 5 years? They will tell you exactly all the features that they have in the pipeline and the things that you're trying to add. So they have a very clear definition of how they ambition the vehicles to be in 5 or 10 years, right? But then when you think about the digital services, they were not as clear, right? They have a general idea of how they want to deliver, but not to the same resolution that they have with the physical product. Why? Because we have been doing this for 50, 100 years, right? We have been actually developing products, and we have a very product-centric structure that takes the features that we see in the market and basically try to engineer the new vehicle that we will have in the future. I think services, especially digital services, and that's why innovation is so important in Volvo, is around how do we translate these experiences that we want to have from the digital services aligned with the values that we have on each of the brands. We have been working with the brands to understand, okay, here is your strategy for products. What is the experience that you want to deliver to the end user from the digital perspective? What is the service blueprint that we want to build to please that customer once they have the right vehicle and the right services? And how do we start prototyping those elements? How do we start validating this is something that is aligned to the values of the brand? This is something that we want to the customers to experience, or this is something that really delivers the value and we can monetize from that. So those are the things that we're trying to do within the Innovation Lab now.
And that story, because there's a lot of things happen along the way, right? To get people on board with that. So we ask people to diagram, what does that customer experience look like? But then we actually need to share that in a really compelling way.
Yeah.
Because the goal is to influence others and get them on board with this vision.
And I think, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, what do you think is the biggest challenge around getting that? Because you mentioned culture. But how different the story is in the different cultures where you've been at Caterpillar prior and now in Volvo, just measuring out like what's the best setup that you can think of to get people think for our listeners here about how to tell that story.
Yeah, I think there are two components. You cannot recycle the same story that you use in one company for the next one, because I think you need to understand the details and what are the drivers that each of the companies have. What is the culture, the underlying culture that move things forward. And I think that's an extremely important point that I spend quite a lot of time understanding how decisions are made in Volvo, right? I mean, it's a different culture. We're a Swedish company. We have a different mindset on how we make decisions. Then understanding what are the priorities that the business have. So the priorities might be different from different areas, right? And then with that is like, how do we connect those priorities that they have, the main goals that they are trying to achieve, with the pain points that we see coming up in the market. Every time we talk to startups, we see, oh, we're developing this new technology or this new service that could be disrupting the entire trucking industry. But then it's like, how do we connect this disruptive technology to the priorities and the vision that the brand have? And if we see that this is so disruptive that might be consider as part of the priorities that we have, is articulating that in the way that the culture accepted to the right people. I actually, when I joined Volvo, I talked a lot with engineers who were actually developing some of the technologies that we see on the startups. They were developing that 10 years ago. And they still show me, we have these slides and we prepare all these slides, but they were unable to articulate or create the sense of urgency to actually embrace those changes. And I think that's where we telling the story in the right way, kind of consolidating the message and connecting that technology or that insight that you got from that into the priorities that we see from the brand is so important. So like as I was saying, like I spend a lot of time talking to leaders in the different areas, talking to engineers, talking to business areas and salespeople to see how can I talk to end users and dealers, customers, and understand the entire ecosystem before we are actually kind of building slide decks and trying to put together a message that may not resonate.
Yeah. Part of that is, and if I can offer some expertise on this side of the storytelling, is reminding that our other stakeholders internally, whether it's our partners or our startups, that we have to allow all of those individuals to tell their stories to us.
Yeah.
And to hear from those individuals why those priorities are important to them.
Yes.
And then say, okay, I've interviewed these customers, partners, et cetera. What are their urgencies right now?
Yeah.
And how do they align with ours?
Yes.
And then saying, okay, now I need to create a narrative that comes from this side of the table, these people who need us so desperately, and then to talk about urgency. And one other tool that you can use when we're talking about urgency is to identify where the shift is. So a shift is something that's happening in the world that causes a behavior change or that needs to facilitate a behavior change. So whether it's working from home, whether it's climate change, whether it's fuel efficiency standards, or even autonomous vehicles, there's a shift happening in the world. If we maintain the status quo, we will be on the side of the losing team. And here's why. And those companies that are already taking this leap or this perhaps the next right incremental step are doing it right. Provide me with examples of who's already making the move in this area that we can say to the rest of our executives, don't worry about the risk of taking this new move because we already know other people are doing it and they're doing it well, even if it's not in our industry.
Yeah.
So when we have the confidence of the urgency of the marketplace and we can identify the shift that's happening for them and for us.
Yeah.
And we can point to other people who are already doing it. We can say, okay, here's the urgency. If we don't do it now, we will get left behind.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to affect behavior change inside of an organization, identify the shift. What's happened for the customer that they need it differently now?
Yeah.
And they didn't need it differently before. And then why do we?
Yeah. And I think that's why we position the Innovation Lab in Silicon Valley, because there we can see all the disruption coming up, right? I mean, we see venture capital pouring tons of money on startups that are developing new supply chain, new robotics, new sensor technology. And our role is to basically bring that back to the rest of the organization and create the story connected to the priorities. Because I think one of the challenges that we had early in the process is like, we were like, oh, look, this is going to disrupt our industry and watch out, this is fear. And then the fear doesn't work that well. We just need to connect more on the incentives, right? This is like, these are your priorities. This is what we see coming up. And to your point, I mean, I love the framework that you bring with the shift. We need to establish the shift in a way that is aligned with their incentives, not as a fear that, oh, if we don't do this change, we're going to disappear. Because I think it's like, that's not going to happen. And I think that most of the people is having this mindset of this. I don't know if you know the story about the frog that if you put it on the cold water and just start warming up, they die because they don't see the gradual change. And I think it's important that if we connect that to the incentives to make it go out, they would be more open to jump into this. And I think part of the story that we're having with that is to tell the story in a way that connects the values with the shift and basically validate that with the amount of investment and startup that are coming up in this area.
Yeah. One of the things we talked about in the innovation economy is learning, right?
Yeah.
And that innovation is really an investment in learning.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get pushback from our executives of like, how much am I paying for this learning? Right?
Yeah.
What do you see or what do you do in thinking about how we look at the investment in innovation and learning?
I think innovation, we need to measure based on the impact that it will generate. So impact can be measured in different ways. You can measure impact in bottom line revenue, right? It's like hard cold cash that we see coming from new services. And that's one way to measure the impact, because you can see the change. But there is other impact that may not be that easy to measure, but still is extremely important, like having a cultural change, right? A different mindset on how to adopt and integrate new technologies. Having the ability to, like, especially a company like Volvo that is leading the development of the technologies in transportation and solutions. Imagine for them, they feel very proud on developing this by ourselves. So it's like, how do we embrace the co-creation and collaboration? And when we start collaborating more and more, that's another impact, right? And so I think there are multiple components on the learning curve that are, one, related to the new revenue coming up. And don't get me wrong, that's extremely important. But I think there are other ways to measure the impact in the way we work, in the way we collaborate with third parties, in the way we embrace the challenges that are coming. And instead of being like the ostrich trying to put their head on the ground, trying to embrace those changes and figure out the way to navigate and get the best out of it.
Yeah, wise words. So I'm going to ask you our 3 compelling questions now, our hot seat questions that I ask all of our guests. So what is the greatest innovation of all time, Freddy? What do you think in all of our human history?
I think the wheel. It's something that really changed the world. And I think about Volvo. Volvo comes from, the logo of Volvo is an iron, is representing the iron, but it's about revolving, and just like how we move around using that shape to move the vehicles and move the world. So I think the wheel is something that I feel has a significant impact, even though it might not be. It could be an invention or a discovery. It could be one of the two.
Either way, we're still using it.
Yep.
Right. Nothing has replaced it just
Nope.
yet. Although jetpacks coming soon. That's what we're hoping for. Right.
Yeah.
Even a plane has to land on wheels. Right?
Yep.
Even at
Absolutely,
the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. Innovation does not happen with one person alone. So if you could join any innovation team in human history, which team would you join?
I like the breakthrough energy, the Bill Gates organization around developing new energy sources. I like that because I think they have a very important mandate, and it's like, how do we create the energy needed for the society in the future in a sustainable way? Today, and they explore everything from nuclear energy all the way to reusing, composting, and like animal and farmland.
Human poop, everything. Yeah. It's really soup to nuts. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that one to me is one of the most influential groups.
So is there an innovation you wish you could see in the world, or something that really pisses you off that you wish somebody would fix for us? What is that thing that you wish would be here now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that the human race is having is the wealth or the distribution of the resources, and how to allocate in a fair way the wealth that we have. Because today it's very hard to see countries that have very poor conditions of living and people suffering, and like there might be ways to support an economy that basically balances those inefficiencies in the financial systems. So that would be one that I think I'd like to see.
Wow. That is a conversation that could be had over a lot of whiskey and for very many hours.
Yeah.
And I would love to engage in that conversation. That's a good one.
Absolutely. Love it. Yeah.
Freddy Daza, thank you so much for joining us today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the Volvo Innovation Lab and your work?
Susan, thank you very much for the time today. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in LinkedIn, but I also, you can find me in the Volvo Group Innovation website, and we can have some details about that. I think it would be important for you guys to learn how do we work, and then there is for you guys to connect directly with me and perhaps share some insights on this.
Fantastic. Freddy Daza from the Volvo Innovation Lab. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.